On today's podcast, I'll be sharing some reflections from this year's March Madness NCAA basketball tournaments and the lessons we can't afford to forget that relate to our lives, our leadership, the teams we are part of in our life and work, and the cultures we are all hoping to be a part of and create. It turns out we need to be reminded each year about these realities of building the best teams. Welcome back to The Thermostat with Jason Barger. If you're currently on a commute, a walk, or just a micro break in your day, glad you're making time to step back, to think, and to reflect on the next steps on your journey. I've never been more convinced the best leaders and team cultures in the world are the ones that make time to step back, breathe in good oxygen, and calibrate their thermostat. I hope today's conversation leaves you feeling grounded and inspired. Now let's dive into today's topic to engage our minds and hearts in order to authentically lead and create compelling cultures wherever we are in the world. Hey everybody, it's Jason and welcome back to the Thermostat Podcast. Wherever you are and however you're coming to the pod today, welcome in. If you're somebody that's been with us from day one, welcome back. And if you are new to the podcast, so glad you are here. We are in season 7, over 160 episodes now. So whether you're new or whether you are one that's been with us from the very beginning, I hope you'll go back and listen to some of the past episodes. There's so many great micropods and also conversations that I've been lucky to have with some great people on this podcast. So thanks for tuning in today. My commitment to you, as always, is this will be a place for you to step back, for you to think, for you to be, have some time and space to think about your own life, to think about your own career, to think about how you are showing up as a leader and the culture that you are trying to create with the people around you. So again, so glad you are here and a part of today's podcast. So before we get started today, I have one quick favor for you. If you will stop and rate the podcast 5 stars, of course, on whatever podcast platform you're listening to. If you rate it 5 stars, leave a review in your authentic words. Those are ways in which the algorithms work and help this podcast reach and extend further into the world. So I appreciate everybody that takes the time to do that. Obviously, every time you also invite somebody else into the podcast, share episodes on social media or with your networks, that's how it spreads. That's how these messages amplify. So thank you to everybody who takes the time to do that. I really, really appreciate it. So, as many of you know, I love the sport of basketball. I love the sport of basketball. I've loved it from the time I was a kid and was lucky to get to play it all the way through college. It is a beautiful sport. And every year, admittedly, those of you that know me well, you know this, that when March Madness comes around each year, the NCAA tournaments, when those come around each year, I get giddy like I'm still in the 3rd grade. The spirit of hope, of dreaming, of every team in the tournament having a chance. Again, beyond basketball, it's riveting to me. I love, again, basketball, but it's so much more than that. It's over a 3-week period, we witness amazing feats, of competition and the ecstasy of victory, and teams that get to advance and keep playing. But also you see that the agony of defeat. It's real life drama that plays out right in front of our eyes. So, but I love it for so much more than just basketball. I love the X's and O's. I love the basketball, of course, side of it. But for me, it's also a reminder each year that plays out right in front of us. Lessons for life about leadership, about teamwork, and what does it mean to be a good teammate, about talent, about grit, about toughness, about coaching, about execution, and ultimately about the culture of winning teams. So, there are powerful truths that remind us each year and challenge our conventional wisdom that it's only about talent. You hear this over and over again that the best teams are just the ones that have the most talent, and yet every year around March Madness, of course, talent is important, but every year we're reminded that to challenge that conventional wisdom, that it's not just about talent. winning and creating a team that continues to get to advance is so much more than just that. So, on today's podcast, I'll be sharing some reflections from this year's March Madness NCAA basketball tournaments and the lessons we can't afford to forget that relate to our lives, our leadership, the teams we are part of in our life and work, and the cultures we are all hoping to be a part of and create. It turns out we need to be reminded each year about these realities of building the best teams. But before we dive into today's topic, let's pause, take a break, and we'll be right back. If you haven't done so already, we hope you'll visit Amazon or Amplify or jasonvbarger.com to check out Breathing Oxygen, my new book that is all about breathing good oxygen into ourselves and mindsets that fuel ourselves and the teams and the organizations around us. Positive, healthy thinking is as essential to great leadership and building a winning culture as the air we breathe. Leading yourself and a team of people has never been more complicated than it is today. As a leader, every move you make is either breathing life into your organization or slowly killing it. The atmosphere can easily turn toxic with negativity, blame, and doubt poisoning the culture. Just like every being on the planet needs good air to breathe, every organization needs leadership that breathes life into its people to sustain the energy required to complete its mission. Breathing Oxygen focuses on 6 key leadership mindsets that breathe life into any team: clarity, inclusivity, mental agility, grit, rest, and ownership. Join us, read, and share Breathing Oxygen.
Available now from Amplify Books on Amazon and jasonvbarger.com.
So I'm sharing some reflections from this year's March Madness NCAA basketball tournaments and the lessons we can't afford to forget, that how it relates, again, beyond basketball, but how it relates to our lives, our own personal leadership, the teams that we are a part of in our life and work, and the cultures we are all hoping to be a part of and create. It turns out, we all need to be reminded each year, at least I love this about the March Madness tournaments, that it reminds us of these things that we know, but we need to be reminded of each year, these realities about building the best teams. And, we had these past March Madness tournaments. We had some absolutely wild tournaments this year. The men's tournament didn't have a single number 1 seed left in the final 8 teams. So for clarity of any of you, no number 1 seeds in any of the final 8 teams. That's the first time that's ever happened. And for clarity for any of you that are non-basketball people, because again, this isn't just really about basketball. This is about life and teams and cultures and leadership. But for anybody out there who isn't really a basketball person, let me explain this to you, that none of the top 12 seeded teams. So none of the top 12 teams that as they came into the tournament that got seeded and put into the brackets by their level, by the highest ranked teams, none of the top 12 in this year's tournament made it to the Final Four. And in the men's tournament, teams like Florida Atlantic and San Diego State made the Final Four. 2 very good teams, but non-traditional, certainly powerhouses, and teams that again, most people would never have predicted would make the Final Four. In the women's bracket, which was as exciting as I can remember, certainly, and we're seeing more and more parity start to show up in women's basketball, and the excitement seems to be growing, which is very cool to see. But in the women's tournament, LSU, who was a 3 seed, ended up winning the tournament. So each year it's fun to step back and after the tournament, or even as we're going into the tournament, to remind ourselves of some things about it, of what are we witnessing, what are we seeing, what are we experiencing, that again are reminders beyond the basketball court, but lessons that we need to be reminded of. And this year's tournaments, made me think about these things. So here's just some quick reflections. These are just some highlights, some general high-level kind of things that the tournaments made me think about this year. The first thing is to remind ourselves that there's no perfect team. There's no perfect team. And even in the women's tournament where South Carolina came into it with a perfect record, 36, I think it was, 0 coming into the tournament, no team is perfect. And all are open for upsets. And on the given day that you play can be upset or beaten by anybody. But there's no perfect team. And in fact, this year, especially in the men's tournament, reminded of this more than ever, that every team had imperfections. There were many, many good teams, but all had their imperfections. And sometimes we as humans get tricked into thinking that the biggest, the baddest, the most talented teams, or again, outside of sports, the most talented companies, organizations are perfect in some sense. And although, in our minds, we know that they absolutely are not, but it's just not as simple as those with the most talent win. Talent is really important. But there are no perfect teams. And so we need to be reminded of that. The University of Connecticut, UConn, this year in the men's tournament, the eventual national champion, had a stretch of games in the middle of their season for a 7-game stretch where they went 2-5. They only won 2 of those 7 games, at one point in the season. So there was no perfect team this year, although they got on a roll and really were playing the best basketball at the end of the season when it mattered. But there was no perfect team. Another reflection and a lesson to remind us of, beyond the fact that there's no perfect team, if you're thinking about, again, the teams or the organization in your life, none of them are perfect. But another reflection from this year's tournament was that the older, more experienced, more cohesive teams seem to be the teams that advanced. And again, I hear people say this all the time, that it's just about talent. And especially in a sport where so many young, talented players go professional early and might only be in college for 1 year, oftentimes our thinking can be you just have to have some of those most talented players. And whereas sometimes they might be sprinkled in to the winning teams, the reality is, and especially this year, the older, more cohesive, more experienced teams were the ones that advanced. And so it's not just about talent. Again, we know talent is important, but it's not as simple as just saying whoever has the most talent wins, because that's just clearly not true at all. And of course, the winning teams always do have talent. You can't win the national championship without having talent, that's for sure. But this year we witnessed time and time again that older, more experienced, better aligned, more mature teams that had the ability to navigate challenges and weather the tough moments, that their teams went through in the midst of a game or a couple of games, those were the ones that advanced. And so it's worth us noting. The other thing that jumped out to me this year is that there is just a lot of talent out there. So again, it's not just about do you have the talent. There's a lot of talent out there, and certainly in the landscape of sports right now with the transfer portal, which I've done a whole another episode where I reference that, the transfer portal. But much like our career lives and our organizations and our businesses, our work world, there is a lot of talent out there. There are so many good basketball players in the world that it's obvious there's so much talent out there. And now with the transfer portal, so many players are able to move from different teams. And so a lot like, the working world, there's an opportunity for people to be attracted to new teams or new organizations and be a part of building something. So this year in the tournament, we saw, there were upsets everywhere. Every single team in the Final Four had a significant player on their team or players on their team that had been brought in from the transfer portal. They'd been brought in to fit a talent need or a playing style need, or a player apiece to supplement that which their team needed. And our businesses and organizations have been in the midst of a serious talent portal, certainly recently, but ever since the pandemic and all the talk around the Great Resignation, which again, I know I've done a number of podcasts about that. But ever since then, the teams and organizations in the world that can attract talent, but then not just attract it, but be able to retain talent and develop the outside talent that they bring in and help them assimilate them into their culture, assimilate their skill set into the style of play and or what they need. Those are the teams that seem to be thriving. So there is so much talent out there, but are you able to attract and retain and develop that talent that you bring into your organization or into your team? And so there is no perfect team. It seems to be the older, more cohesive, more experienced teams seem to be the ones that are thriving. And those that are able to go find and seek out talent and bring them in and attract and retain and develop the talent are the ones assimilating that into their skill set, their needs, their playing style, are the ones that are thriving. A couple other things I'll just point out for today is that bench players played huge roles in these tournaments. Bench players played huge roles. We love focusing on the stars and the key players in sports, but we also love to think about the highest performers in our teams, in our organizations, in our life and work. And we need these A players and stars to be stars and perform well. And many, teams and organizations, of course, we need those. But we also know that every human has off nights. Every player has off nights, and every team and organization has off nights or projects that don't go the way that we hope they would. So we need other people to be able to step up. Stars get a lot of attention, but bench players are invaluable. This was never more clear than in the women's national championship game when Jasmine Carson came off the bench for the LSU Tigers. She was a player that during the year had only averaged about 8 points per game, an important role player, but had only averaged about 8 points a game during the season. And yet in the biggest game of their lives, in the national championship game, in the biggest moments when their other players got in foul trouble and they were struggling and needing somebody to step up, she delivered in these big moments with 5 3-point shots and 22 points. She ultimately, coming off of the bench, became the biggest difference in that game and helping them to win the national championship. So all across these big games in the tournament that we were watching, bench players impacted the games in huge ways, either by their ineffectiveness, teams that didn't make it because the bench didn't really respond well, or the ones that advanced, they had performances that provided surprising fuel and helped lift the players that might be having an off night. So in our teams and organizations, remembering that role that bench players play in helping an organization succeed. And as always, some of the fundamental things that we're reminded of each year are the teams that advance, the teams that win are the ones that, one, believe that it is possible. They believe in the dream. They believe in the vision. 2, they are connected with each other and that vision and realize they can't do it alone. They have to be in alignment and connected to each other and really playing for each other and that mission and vision that's bigger than themselves. When adversity arrives, which it always does, there's always a game or a situation or moments when adversity arrives, it's in those moments they pull toward each other rather than away from each other. And then they also, in the moments, they also know that they execute their plans and they have a good game plan. They're able to execute on their game plan. And as the game unfolds, they're able to make adjustments and see what they need to do differently. And lastly, they lead during the pressure moments. They set the temperature that they've practiced, that they've prepared for all year long. So, congrats to the University of Connecticut. Congrats to the LSU Tigers. They definitely were playing the best basketball when it mattered most, but it wasn't because they were perfect teams, but it might have had an element to it that they were older, experienced, more cohesive. They were teams that showed that you were able to bring in new talent and assimilate into the culture. They had bench players that played huge roles, and they believed it was possible. They were connected. They executed. And in the pressure moments, they set the temperature that they wanted. So, a few questions for us to ponder for our own life and our own work today. How is your team, however you're defining that in your life and work, how is your team intentionally growing your culture, your vision, your emotional intelligence, or the maturity in order to handle the ups and downs? How are you doing? What is it that you're specifically doing? What are you doing to attract, to retain, and develop new players into your culture? In what ways are you supporting the development of your bench players or those emerging leaders in your team and your organization so that they can be prepared and ready when the biggest moments need them? And what are you doing to cultivate belief and alignment toward how you're committed to playing together and the future you're trying to create? The best teams don't just magically happen. They are led, they are cultivated, and created by all within a team's ecosystem. They have clarity on the temperature they are trying to set, and then they breathe oxygen into those mindsets and actions every single day. I hope today's episode got you thinking in some new ways. I hope it was a little walk down memory lane with March Madness and these past tournaments, but I hope that these resonated with you. If you have insights or you have questions or comments about it, please reach out to us, info@jasonvbarger.com, and let us know. We're continuing to try to design content to help meet you where you are. Lastly, I hope you'll go back and listen to a number of the past episodes and I really hope they continue to add value to you. Remember, step back, remember, be a thermostat, and breathe good oxygen. Thank you for listening to today's podcast, and I hope the messages and questions stimulate positive change along your path. As always, if these messages resonate with you and add value to your life, I hope you'll help amplify them throughout the world. Please rate, comment, and share on whatever podcast or social media platform you're using, and share this podcast with the people in your life or work who should be part of these conversations. That way, this spirit does, in fact, spread. If these messages or developing leaders and culture would be helpful to you and your organization, please contact us at jasonvbarger.com, jasonvbarger.com. And remember, we are all ambassadors for the culture we want to create in our life and work. We have to own the vision we want to be a part of. The future of leadership is you, is me, is us. Be a thermostat.